there was so much confusion and so much contradiction involved in the condition of Archbishop Thuc, his mental capacity and so on, that finally 3 of our priests, Father Sanborn, Father Kelly, and I, actually flew to Munich, Germany, for the sake of getting our own answers and not relying on all these second, third, fourth-hand reports. We went to Munich to talk to the 2 men who were the closest associates of Archbishop Thuc, Dr. Hiller and Dr. Heller. Actually, they were 2 university professors at the University of Munich. And they were very much involved with Archbishop Thuc. They were the only 2 present at some of his consecrations. And they were involved in many of the consecrations of Thuc. So we thought because of their close association with him, their involvement with him on a personal basis, especially with regard to the consecrations that he was alleged to have done, we thought we just have to go and talk to these men and bypass all of the just rumors. As far as I know, we're the only ones who did that diligence to actually try to sit down with him. And we arrived with a number of questions that we needed answered. I will say that and I think this is true of all 3 of us, I think all 3 of us arrived with goodwill, not predispositions to say, we're going to go there and prove them wrong or prove there's something wrong with them. In fact, the idea we had was not to try to justify some of the things that Archbishop Thuc had done, but to find out, in fact, if we could verify the validity of the ordinations and consecrations they'd done. So that at least if people in this country were availing themselves of clergy ordained and consecrated by Archbishop Thuc, we'd have some kind of confidence that, okay, we got the answers we needed to show that the correct matter, form, and intention necessary for the valid sacrament were present. And so that would be very reassuring. I can't speak for Bishop Kelly in that, can't speak for Father Sanborn in that so much. I can say for my own sake, I would have been very relieved to find out that we could at least have the certitude we need that these were valid, okay, going forward. So as I say, we didn't go over there to prove one way or the other. We just were looking for answers. And we took a dolmetscher, a translator with us. These 2 gentlemen teaching in Munich, obviously German, native language. We took a native German-speaking person who spoke fluent English. As it turns out, it wasn't necessary because they both spoke fluent English. Understood perfectly what we said, and we understood perfectly what they said. They were very, very candid. We appreciated that. I actually recorded the sessions we had with them. At that time, it was on cassette tape, but it was adequate. It worked. So we asked a series of questions. Our focus at first had to do with the consecrations that Thuc had done, that they had witnessed. And we were asking them to simply tell us what they had seen and heard, specifically with regard to the matter and form of the sacrament. Did they actually hear the words which constitute the form of the sacrament? Were they spoken? Were they spoken correctly? Did they witness the laying on of hands, for example, the matter of consecration of a bishop? So we were looking for some very specific answers. And the answer we got from them was they didn't recall, they didn't know this was necessary, it was never explained to them what constituted the matter and form, and that they really were not witnesses. They were just there serving as servers. But they could not testify when we were asking the question, nor could they have testified at the time either, because they didn't know what to look for. Nothing was explained to them with regard to the matter and form. As far as the intention of Archbishop Thuc, they gave us an earful about that, especially the gentleman in the evening. I think it was Professor Heller, if I'm not mistaken. It's a little foggy here, but I think it was. But in any case, as I say, we have the record of that. But they both gave us some testimony about Archbishop Thuc's state of mind. And I would have thought that since they were proponents of the Archbishop Thuc consecrations, that they would have whitewashed it or somehow, as it were, played down or minimized the rumors. But what they told us went far beyond anything we had heard by rumor. They said that he had the mind of a child. Archbishop Thuc had the mind of a child. I mentioned this before in some of our What Catholics Believe programs. They told us that there were cats. He had 5 cats, and they were walking across the altar when he said Mass in his apartment. This was routine. It wasn't just something they had witnessed as a one occasion. When we even asked him why Archbishop Thuc, if he did, in fact, consecrate Jean Laverie, the homosexual beer-delivering activist, He was a homosexual activist in Paris who had actually started his own religion, basically. He had already been consecrated outside the church by his whiteness Martugdual II of the Celtic Church. So this man was truly, a schismatic who had left the Catholic Church. And was he in fact consecrated by Thuc then, subsequently to that? And the answer was yes, he was. And when we asked, why would Archbishop Thuc do that? And Archbishop Thuc knew that he had been consecrated outside the Catholic Church already. So why would he then administer the traditional rite of episcopal consecration on a man like that? He did it conditionally, which is a clear indication that he already knew he'd been through a consecration ceremony, in this case, schismatically. And they testified that they asked Archbishop Thuc that very same question. Why would you do that? And his answer, they said, was, because I thought it would make him a Catholic by consecrating him a bishop. It's absurd, But they testified, and in fact under oath, that this was what he said to them. Again, we kind of pursued that a bit because Archbishop Thuc was alleged to have a doctorate in moral theology and canon law, I think. How he could in any way justify this is mind. And when we asked, well, why would he do such a thing? The answer was, well, he didn't have much money. Literally, quote unquote, he didn't have very much money. That opened up all kinds of questions, So, this was formal testimony coming from those who were the closest associates of Archbishop Thuc. This was very distressing. They did also acknowledge that before he had the consecration ceremony of Father Mgr Lefebvre, he had just a week previously concelebrated the Novus Ordo with the Bishop of Toulon in France, with 5 other Novus Ordo priests. And this came just after he had told Mgr Lefebvre that he didn't believe John Paul II was even a pope. So he concelebrates the new Mass. And again, they said they asked him, how could you do that? And his answer to them that they gave was that he felt he had a debt of gratitude to the bishop, the Novus Ordo Bishop of Toulon, who'd taken him in and given him this apartment and let him have a confessional and a function at his cathedral. But it was okay because when it came time for the consecration at the new Mass, he withheld his intention. And, this is moral theology 101, sacramental theology 101. To withhold your intention and simulate a sacrament is a sacrilege. But he said this justified what he was doing. So there was clearly something wrong, something gravely wrong. So we came away, all 3 of us came away with the idea that we can't touch this. Father Sanborn also came away with that. I asked him explicitly that we cannot touch this. We cannot inflict this on the people. Father Sanborn said at the time that he had his own subjective confidence, certitude in Father Mgr Lefebvre that he would have been sure that his consecration was valid. But even there, Mgr Lefebvre had to interrupt Archbishop Thuc during the ceremony to remind him not to invoke the name of John Paul II, because Archbishop Thuc had told him that he didn't believe that he was the Pope. And Mgr Lefebvre had told Archbishop Thuc that he didn't want to be consecrated by him if Archbishop Thuc believed he was a Pope. Again, these men testified, and they were the only other people in the room, but they testified that Mgr Lefebvre had to interrupt and stop Archbishop Thuc from invoking the name because he repeatedly invoked the name of John Paul II as having authorized that consecration, which is preposterous, obviously. So again, there were serious problems. So if someone's going to ask us, well, on what basis do we question the mental state of Archbishop Thuc? It would be on the basis of the fact that we investigated, as well as anybody really could, going to talk to the 2 men on earth who had the most involvement with him. These were serious men. They were university professors, and they spoke in a very forthright, very honest way. They didn't try to cover anything up, as far as we could tell. What they had to say was not favorable. It was not encouraging. It didn't allay any fears. It just actually sealed them.